Questions for reflection. The encounter between the Lord and Moses, presented in our first reading for today's Holy Mass, not only paints a picture of one of the great dangers still faced by God's people, idolatry, but a portrait of a true leader. Moses is certainly disheartened, perhaps even angry. The people of Israel, while he was on the top of Sinai communicating with the Lord and receiving the 10 Commandments, melted down gold and erected an idol, which they danced before. But notice his reaction. He's a true leader. The Lord does not hold him responsible for the egregious sin of idolatry. The Lord even promises to make a great people from his lineage. But Moses so identifies with the people whom he was entrusted to lead that he intercedes before God on their behalf. This is true leadership from a truly godly leader. How it is needed in this very moment in the church. Like Israel, many of God's new people, the people of the new covenant, the church, are succumbing to a new form of idolatry. The Catholic Catechism tells us, and I quote, "Idolatry not only refers to false pagan worship, it remains a constant temptation to faith. Idolatry consists in divinizing what is not God. Man commits idolatry whenever he honors and reveres a creature in place of God, whether this be gods or demons, for example, Satanism, power, pleasure, race, ancestors, the state, money, etc. Jesus says, you cannot serve God and mammon. Many martyrs died for not adoring the beast, refusing even to simulate such worship. Idolatry rejects the unique lordship of God. It is therefore incompatible with communion with God." And the Catechism continues, "Human life finds its unity in the adoration of the one God. The commandment to worship the Lord alone integrates man and saves him from an endless disintegration. Idolatry is a perversion of man's innate religious sense. An idolater is someone who transfers his indestructible notion of God to anything other than God." And that's paragraphs 2113 and 2114 of the Catechism. Do we pray for those among God's people today who've succumbed to idolatry? We should. Have we succumbed to any form of idolatry ourselves? The psalmist recounts this horrid event in our responsorial psalm appointed for today's Mass. And I quote, "They forgot the God who was saving them, who had done great deeds in Egypt, such wonders in the land of Ham, such awesome deeds at the Sea of Reeds." He continues, "He thought of putting an end to them had not Moses, his chosen one, taken a stand in the breach and confronted him to turn his anger away from destroying them." End quote. How we need bishops, priests, and deacons who, like Moses, plead with God for the people of the church in this urgent moment. Do we pray for such leaders to be raised up in our own time? We should. The Gospel appointed for today's Holy Mass is the conclusion of the 5th chapter of St. John. Jesus is being confronted by some of the religious leaders for healing on the Sabbath. He spells out with clarity his relationship to the Father. As we have seen all week, they are so blinded by their own pride, their own form of idolatry, that they do not recognize the very authority of the God they claim to serve, right in front of them. In effect, they have come to worship themselves. Rather than use nuanced words, Jesus exposes and confronts them. He tells them Moses himself, to whom they purport to trace their own authority, judges them. They failed to recognize John, the forerunner, the last prophet of the Old Testament and the first prophet of the New. And they failed to recognize the incarnate Word of the Father. The scene speaks to us of people who, even though they prided themselves on their strict adherence to the law and believed they were being devout, had become incapable of seeing the source and fulfillment of the law as he stood in their midst. People don't decide to be this way. It happens with subtlety. I suggest that we can easily become these kind of men and women if we fail to stay in a fresh and ongoing intimate communion with the Lord. How are we doing? Lent is a good time for examining ourselves before the Lord.